This event is presented by the Business Association of Stanford Entrepreneurial Students. We're the largest entrepreneurial student organization in Silicon Valley. For more information, please visit bases.stanford.edu, or you can also follow us on Twitter @BasesEvents. So let me begin by introducing our panel, starting with nearest to me. We have Vivek Wadhwa, who is a fellow with the Labor and Work-Life Program at Harvard Law School, an executive in residence adjunct professor at the Pratt School of Engineering at Duke University. He's the founder of 2 startups and is currently a visiting professor at UC Berkeley. He's also an advisor to several startup companies and a regular columnist for BusinessWeek.com and TechCrunch. Next, we have Patrick Chung, who joined NEA in 2004 and is co-lead of NEA's consumer practice, focusing on internet and mobile investments across stage. He is director of 23andMe, Looped, Good Guide, MyFit, and Real-Time Worlds, and is actively involved with Nurian and the firm's venture growth activities. Prior to joining NEA, Patrick helped to grow Zephyr, an internet service firm acquired by NEC, to more than $100 million in annual revenues and more than 700 people across 6 global offices. Prior to Zephyr, Patrick was with McKinsey & Company, where he specialized in hardware, software, and service companies. Patrick received a joint JD MBA degree from Harvard Business School and Harvard Law School, where he served as an editor of the Harvard Law Review. Patrick was a Commonwealth Scholar at Oxford University, where he earned a Master of Science degree. Patrick earned his AB degree at Harvard University in Environmental Science. He's a member of the New York and Massachusetts bars and a member of the committee to visit Harvard College. Next, we have Mark Suster. Mark joined GRP Partners in 2007 after having worked with GRP for nearly 8 years as a 2-time entrepreneur. Most recently, Mark was Vice President of Product Management at Salesforce.com, following its acquisition of Coral, where Mark was founder and CEO. Prior to Coral, Mark was founder and CEO of Build Online, the largest independent global content collaboration company focused on the engineering and construction sectors, which was acquired by Sword Group. Earlier in his career, Mark spent nearly 10 years working for Accenture in Europe, Japan, and the US, and Mark is also the author of the popular blog, Both Sides of the Table. And finally, we have Steve Blank, who is a retired serial entrepreneur. He currently teaches entrepreneurship to both undergraduate and graduate students at UC Berkeley, Columbia University, and Stanford. Steve authored the acclaimed text, 4 Steps to the Epiphany, and was a recipient of the 2009 Undergraduate Teaching Award in the Department of Management Science and Engineering at Stanford, as well as the Earl F. Chelt Outstanding Teaching Award at UC Berkeley Haas School of Business. The San Jose Mercury News has listed Steve as one of the 10 influencers in Silicon Valley, and Steve will be acting as the moderator of our panel today. Just quickly, the format, the panel will be going for about 45 minutes, following which we'll have about a half hour for any and all questions you may have. So without further ado, Steve, you can take it away.
Thank you, and thanks for the introduction and this esteemed panel. I thought we'd have the boxing gloves here today, but we'll have to do it virtually. I think the subject, nature versus nurture in entrepreneurship, is one that's either implicitly or explicitly talked about in Silicon Valley and other places, and in fact affects a lot of our behaviors and how we select entrepreneurs, how we fund them, why do people come to Silicon Valley. And I think this panel is just an excellent place to get the discussion out in the open. And I think we have vocal and articulate proponents on each side and one solidly in the middle. So this should be a fun panel. So what I thought we'd do today is maybe the first 3 questions, which I'm going to telegraph for the panel, is actually kind of agree, if we can, on some terms. And the 3 terms that I'd be really interested in hearing from each panel, one term at a time, is what's an entrepreneur, what's nature, and what's nurture. So why don't we start with what's an entrepreneur and what are entrepreneurial characteristics that we're going to be talking about? And let me start maybe with Vivek at the end of the...
I've written about this topic, and I got into a heated debate with Businessweek readers about what's an entrepreneur. My view used to be that anyone who starts a company who takes the risk is an entrepreneur. Someone who jumps out of a airplane without a parachute in the hope of figuring it out before they land is an entrepreneur. But then the debate was that, well, how about a dry cleaner? Is a dry cleaner an entrepreneur? Is a lawyer an entrepreneur? Is anyone who opens up a hot dog stand an entrepreneur? And I went back and forth, and like I said, this provoked a lot of discussion online. And my conclusion at the end of it was that there are two types of entrepreneurs: replicative entrepreneurs and innovative entrepreneurs. Replicative entrepreneurs basically get into businesses in which they follow the beaten path. If you're opening up a dry cleaner, it's a pretty standard thing. I mean, you're basically franchising, you're following the rules, and you have a pretty straightforward business. It's the same with a law firm. That yes, you're taking a risk, but you're charging by the hour. There's no real innovation that goes on in law firm, unless you're working for Goldman Sachs, perhaps. And an innovative entrepreneur are the types that we see in Silicon Valley. Someone who does go out and want to change the world. They're obsessed, they're motivated, they need to make an impact, and they're the ones who start companies.
Okay. So innovative entrepreneurs, innovative, not imitative. That's
exactly
your definition.
Absolutely.
Patrick, do you agree, or how would you define it?
I like Vivek's definition. What I would say is an entrepreneur is someone who has really a creative urge. And that creative urge can be innovative, it can be replicative. And I wouldn't make a value judgment on either type of them. I wouldn't say that the innovative ones are actually better than the people who start dry cleaners or law firms, because I think that at the end of the day, you are putting yourself at risk. And I think one of the other common traits to entrepreneurs, probably an identifying trait, is what Vivek said at the beginning about the parachute. The person who jumps out of a plane without a clue as to what he's going to do before he lands is actually a little bit crazy and actually a little bit irrational. And I think irrationality is probably a defining characteristic of entrepreneurs, because you have to believe that whatever you start, your dry cleaner, your internet startup, your law firm that you start, that against everyone else who's doing exactly what you're doing, and the thousands of people who are going to compete against you, that you are going to be successful among them. And I think that's fundamentally a statistically irrational belief, and that's what makes entrepreneurs so fun.
Okay, so we have Vivek, innovative, right? And now we have irrational. Is that the other?
I like irrationality.
Innovative and irrational. Mark, what's an entrepreneur?
I think I was maybe brought here to be the controversial one.
Glad someone else is taking that role.
I find it maybe too broad of a definition of an entrepreneur. It's a bit like, what is an artist? Anybody who can take colors and put them on paper. Then you have to ask the broader question, what is a good artist? Sure, you're an entrepreneur if you start a business almost definitionally. And I do like the distinction of, I think you call it replicative versus innovative. And how could one disagree with that? A father is anybody who has children. But for me, the bigger question to ask is, what makes a good entrepreneur? And I know you didn't ask it that way, but for me, that would be my definition, or where I would focus my energy, is somebody who, as a starting point, is willing to take the risk, because if you're not willing to jump out of the airplane, you're probably not going to be a great entrepreneur. I meet people like this all the time who stay at their consulting job. They've been telling me they're going to start a business for 15 months. They're doing it on evenings and weekends. They'd be prepared to go start this amazing company if only you would fund them. And I say, a priori, you're not going to be a great entrepreneur. You don't have that attribute of risk-taking. So for me, a lot of it comes down to, first of all, a certain amount of intellect, a certain amount of street smarts, kind of understanding the way things get done in the world, a certain amount of willingness to take risk, a certain amount of leadership skills, because with the exception of the replicative entrepreneur, which is a definition I'm glad now to have in my vocabulary, but the innovative entrepreneur, often what you're trying to do is get a group of people to quit their job and join your mission when by all logic they shouldn't. And it's true you can attract B players and you can attract C players to any old crappy startup. But if you're going to build a great company, and if you are a great entrepreneur, you've got to have the best to come and join you when by all rational standards they shouldn't. You've got to get venture capitalists to be willing to write you a check when they've told the last 1,000 people no. You've got to get customers to agree to use your product when you have 2 months cash left in the bank and they're putting their reputation on the line working with you. So, I could go on, and I don't want to dominate the whole conversation, but I would start with an opening salvo, which is the only interesting thing to me is what makes a great entrepreneur.
Steve, I need to rebut that.
Great. Oh.
Okay, now when you start putting good or bad on it, you're passing judgment. I mean, I'll tell you, someone in India who's selling, samosas on the street is an entrepreneur, right? Now, whether they're good or bad is a different thing. Silicon Valley doesn't own entrepreneurship. And the issue that I have is that when you start talking about raising capital and this and that, you're taking Silicon Valley and extrapolating to the world.
That's a fair point.
Right.
Let me talk about the samosa salesman in India, right? There's the samosa salesman who wakes up every day and sits at his cart and doesn't think about ways to get new people to come to his cart. And there's the samosa salesman who figures out how to hang up signs around town and drive people to his thing. So it's a fair comment to say I shouldn't judge entrepreneurship based on venture capital and Silicon Valley centers, and I actually don't.
But let me get a second part of
But I
my
still think that there's a need to define good versus bad.
Okay, so first of all, let's agree that you have the samosa guy who just has his own stand, who's a replicative entrepreneur, and the guy who decides to now create a franchise, who develops a special type of samosa. Samosa, by the way, is an Indian pastry sort of thing. It's really delicious. But the guy who now decides to franchise and develop a new type of samosa, add the new ingredients to it, and then sets up multiple stands and gets other people to work for him, that guy's an innovator. So you can have innovators in the middle of a poor city in a poor country, and they can still be good entrepreneurs. Now, the difference between good and bad, how do you judge what's good? Is it all about making money? Is it about doing good for the world? Is it about educating your children? Is it about making an impact? Is it about rising above poverty? God knows what good is. And I would refrain from trying to judge people on whether they're good or bad.
But that's kind of what's wrong in this country, Vivek, is that we want to raise children and say everybody deserves a trophy and everybody can be great, and then you end up misleading people, and I think that's misleading people. There are certain skill sets that you need if you're going to take that leap of faith. To tell the guy who's got a chaiwala job to go set up a samosa stand, if that person doesn't have the attributes of someone who's likely, even in a replicative sense, to be successful, would be unfair. And I just think, I understand, not wanting to box people in, but nonetheless, every day I'm asked about whether a person should make that, not every day, but at least 3 or 5 times a week, I'm asked, should I make the leap to being an entrepreneur? And there are times where I substantively look you in the eye and I'll say, look, I'm one data point, but my opinion is keep your day job.
So let me ask all of you, if I can. And Vivek, you used replicable versus innovative, and let me just maybe push back a little, because in that definition, Baidu is not an entrepreneur. They're replicative, the Chinese Google. Maybe there's another metric, because it's the one I implicitly hear us defining as an entrepreneur, and that is the word entrepreneur in Silicon Valley has a very different meaning than it does in Iowa. What we're really talking about in the Valley is a scalable entrepreneur who could take an idea and grow it into a large, profitable business, implicitly raising risk capital and returning an obscene return to its investors. Are we talking about all entrepreneurs or those type of entrepreneurs when you guys have an image in your mind? Do you think it generalizes, or are we talking about the case of build it big beyond the resources available?
I want to rip into Silicon Valley before I let Patrick speak. Okay. My view is that Silicon Valley has blinders on. All they see is Silicon Valley. They see the whole world through their own eyes, including defining entrepreneurs. Silicon Valley is one little tiny speck in the world.
So how are you defining entrepreneurs? Are you defining it broadly? Or
I'm defining it broadly. I look at the world.
And Mark, how are you defining entrepreneurs? When you think of entrepreneurs, are you thinking about guys like you who wanted to build something huge, or are you thinking about a dry cleaner in Pittsburgh?
Okay, so there's no question that there are multiple types of entrepreneurs. I would just say, though, for me to have a reasonable discussion in Palo Alto, I think it would be helpful if we narrowed the scope to talk about technology, maybe life sciences, and what we know. It's a bit like going to New York City, the center of the financial capital of the world, and talking about producing Hollywood films. So I think it would be useful to have that framework, even though I don't think we disagree that there's a broader definition. I think we'd have a more interesting discussion. Now, sorry, Steve, just one differentiation for me is there is huge value in the entrepreneur who tries to create a medium-sized business that may deliver 5, 6, 8, 12, 15 million in revenues, 2, 3, 5 million in EBITDA, and never try to raise capital and be huge. And I'll give you one quick example. It's called Westside Rentals. It's based in Los Angeles. It's a horrible website. And they've been around for 10 to 12 years. And for whatever reason, this guy, year in, year out, has found a way to make millions in profit. And he has a pretty nice life. I think that's an entrepreneur.
So when we're talking about nature versus nurture, and Patrick, jump in here, do you want to have the conversation about the Silicon Valley scale class entrepreneur? But given we have...
Yeah, I side with Vivek on this question. I think if you're talking about nature versus nurture, and we're going to probably, I hope we're going to get into genetics and upbringing, psychology, and all that. I think it's actually it's too granular to say this type of upbringing or this type of genetics is going to produce this type of entrepreneur or that type of entrepreneur. I think what's common to the Chaiwala and the Silicon Valley entrepreneur is the fundamental, I believe, irrationality. And number two, the willingness to take huge risk, personal risk, to see something creative happen. And I think that trait can be applied in all sorts of ways. It can be applied in the internet, can be applied in dry cleaning, can be applied in a law firm. And I think that fundamental quality doesn't change. All we're seeing is different manifestations of it, which I think, I know we're jumping ahead, could, your upbringing could affect it. If you grew up in Silicon Valley, you're more likely to become exposed to technology and therefore to apply those natural or learned talents in that direction.
So, but just definitionally, I just want to say that it's not that I'm on the other side of that argument, and I'm okay to talk more broadly. I just thought, given where we are and the type of individuals who are likely in the room, maybe I'm making assumptions, and likely watching this later on film, probably have a certain stereotype and a certain business ideal in mind. I think the attributes hold no matter what. I just thought it might narrow the discussion, but I'm okay to...
So let's see what we did agree on so far. What I heard is an entrepreneur is innovative, they're irrational, they take risks. Is that what you guys would agree on?
An innovative entrepreneur is.
Can we also add they're tenacious? Yeah.
They're sometimes tenacious. No, again, this tenacious is a white Silicon Valley stereotype. And that's the way we assume that the whole world is.
Let's have a lovely example of somebody who can be a successful entrepreneur defined as someone who can earn a good profit and a living from their activities who's not tenacious.
A lot of people. I mean, I know a lot of Indian entrepreneurs, for example, who are very mild-mannered, very humble, and they've achieved extraordinary success.
But tenacious
does
not mean the opposite of humble. It just means someone who's persistent.
The way the word tenacity is used in Silicon Valley...
how about persistent? Would that work for you?
Persistent is fine.
Great.
Yeah,
Would that work for you, Mark? Great.
So
now
one
we got...
of the best definitions of who is an entrepreneur I've heard is someone who goes to sleep thinking, oh, crap. And someone who wakes up and the first thought in their mind is, oh, crap. And I think that that speaks to the type of risk that you're living. If you're working in a giant firm, chances are, unless you're in crisis, you're not thinking that.
Okay. Would they be opportunistic? Can we add that as well?
Sure.
I think I think we're totally off base if we don't put the definition on it, because you're telling me that a Chaiwala is going to go to bed every night thinking, oh, crap, and wake up thinking, oh, crap, and they're not trying to change anything other than to sell the same units tomorrow that they sold yesterday?
Well, I agree with Vivek. I think you're applying a value judgment to what makes a good and bad entrepreneur. We can get into that, but if we're talking about what makes an entrepreneur, I wouldn't apply a value judgment to someone who is even scrapping out a living from his or her own effort.
So let's go on ESPN and let's talk about basketball, and we won't have any discussion about three-point skills, about inside game, about boxing out, about rebounding. Let's just talk about what it is to shoot a basketball. I mean, that makes no sense to have that discussion.
So it sounds like the word entrepreneur across the table really means different things to different people, right? I mean, when I listen to Vivek's description, it's actually quite broad. And in fact, I'm glad we have the spectrum of, and Patrick would maybe narrow it down a bit, given that he's funding a type of entrepreneur. And I think, Mark, you're articulating a very focused Silicon Valley view of what you would believe.
I wouldn't define it as Silicon Valley. I've lived in 9 countries. I've lived in 3 continents. I'm based in Los Angeles.
But it's not the same description as Vivek.
Of all the investments I've done, only one has been in Silicon Valley.
So how would you differentiate your description? I mean, it's not the same description as Vivek's, right? How would you differentiate it?
I don't think we differ. other than to say we can define an entrepreneur really broadly, and we can get into a 25-minute esoteric debate about the definition of an entrepreneur.
Done.
Or we
Done.
could, yeah. Or we could narrow our scope and have a serious discussion.
Well, let's use the word tech entrepreneur to define the type of person
Tech,
that Mark.
tech entrepreneur.
I think
Thank
we
you.
can agree on that.
I think we have just gotten past the Webster's definition for this panel. So,
We would make great United Nations panelists.
But I thought it was important because, as you could see, we started with we all had a kind of a mental model of what we were about to talk about for nature versus nurture, and we weren't even coming from the same place. At least here it's on the table. So, Mark, let me start with you.
Yep.
Given that now model that we've heard of a tech entrepreneur,
Yep.
Vivek, if you could let us do that for a while, where do you think those skills come from?
So, let me start by saying, and I publicly said it on my blog, and I believe it, it is a combination of nature and nurture. And I think you further debate on your blog I think you define it as nature, nurture, and culture. So the point that I tried to make is when I grew up, I believed it was 80% nurture, 20% nature. And I know that we like to think that as parents. As educators, it's a nice message to say you can have a huge influence. As students, everybody wants to believe it. I believe that the die is cast from a very young age, and you can definitely teach people to be a better entrepreneur, and we could have definitions about that. I can improve your sales skills. I can improve your coding skills. I can improve your project management skills. But if you imagine, again, my basketball analogy, I just say, there's only so good that I'm ever going to be. And that's defined by my, kind of white, Jewish, short mother who gave me these genes. And I believe that there are certain attributes that are defined from the time you're young. So when I flipped was when I became a father and I had 2 children, and they're so very different, and one is assertive and one is shyer, and I don't believe it's birth order or anything that I've done. So here's where I've come out. I definitely think it's both. I believe the preponderance is towards nature being the bigger driver, not of whether you can be an entrepreneur, anybody can be an entrepreneur, but whether you can create something truly tech scalable in Silicon Valley.
Okay.
I got to disagree with that 100%.
Oh, really?
I'll talk about my own example. When I was growing up, my father was...
Patrick, is it all right?
I think since these 2 guys are on the polls should speak, and then the truth will come out.
Great. All right. Perfect.
My dad was a government servant, basically, in other words, a bureaucrat.
Yeah.
My mom was a teacher. Okay, basically, when I was growing up, I couldn't ever imagine myself being an entrepreneur. It was so far from reality, I could never even think of it. You talked about 80-20. It was 99.999 versus 0.001% that I would ever become an entrepreneur.
Why? How do you know that?
Because I had no interest in entrepreneurship. I had no inkling of it. There was
I
nothing
know, but
entrepreneurial
the
about me.
attributes could
I
be
never started a
innately,
teacher. No.
could be innately built in
I had
you.
absolutely no interest in it. I started
Having an interest in it doesn't define
I
whether
was
or
a
not you
computer.
have the
My goal was to code better, to write better code. I never thought I'd be starting companies or doing any of this stuff. But what happened was that I wrote such great code that it ended up leading to a company that IBM wanted to fund. And I was also nervous. I wasn't the type of person who would start a company, but IBM funded us, and I happened to go along for the ride. And I became an entrepreneur. I mean, look at me now. I'm out there, assertive, outgoing, and so on. That's not how I used to be when I was a kid. I changed because of circumstance. So basically, my view is the exact opposite, that if I can do it, anyone can do it.
Uh-huh. And Patrick, how about you?
I think that this is a false dichotomy. I know you've said 99.99, 80-20, but it actually is a false dichotomy. I sit on the board of a company called 23andMe, and basically we are a personal genome service. You spit into a cup, we will sequence not all of your DNA, but a good deal of it, genotype a lot of you, and we'll tell you amazing things about yourself. And most of the traits that we talk about are non-Mendelian, so they are like heart attacks. So I'm at a 3% higher risk of developing a heart attack than the average populace. But then we also say risk of heart attack is around 40% genetically determined and around 60% behaviorally determined. And of the 40%, you have a 3% higher likelihood So it is you have a propensity to develop a heart attack, but that 3% higher genetic propensity is crushed by your behavior. So if you do proper diet, exercise, that 60% will crush the 40%. And I think that's what we're talking about here. I think people are born with certain personality traits that may predispose them to become entrepreneurs. But it's the circumstances, it's Vivek's story, it's the circumstances of how you grow up that will actually allow you to express those or repress those, I think, natural tendencies. I think about, a young Bill Gates who, was obviously very entrepreneurial. And were it not for the fact that his family was independently wealthy, or that he lived at the dawn of the computer age, or that he met a good mentor or two, or saw a good business partner or two, Paul Allen, etc., he would probably not have expressed those traits as readily as he did. And so I think that it really is a mixture of the two.
So Patrick, you believe it's kind of an expression of the nature you're born with and how it's nurtured? Is that the summary?
I think it can be expressed or not. And both states are actually authentic to the person.
And let me do a deep dive since we have you for a second, Patrick. Does your fund at NEA fund a type of entrepreneur?
No, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that at all.
What percentage of the fund are women?
I think it is probably higher than the average of Silicon Valley. I will have to check on that.
What would you say the average of Silicon Valley is?
Yeah, did I hear 5%? There was just a story in the Times 2 days ago on this. Does anyone remember what the Times said? Did they list a number?
Bart, you want to throw out the stats?
Oh, did you write the story?
No.
Oh, okay.
She's been researching this topic.
Oh, all right.
It depends on which year, so it ranges between, I think 07 was 9%, and then 3% was last year.
3%. It was 3% last year. That's what.
So Patrick,
Yeah, I would say probably, and I'm just guessing, Steve, but I would say probably slightly under 10% of our entrepreneurs are women. Actually, the company that I just talked about, 23andMe, founded by 2 women. The chief operating officer of the company is a woman. The entire senior management team are women. And it is a superstar company.
So, Patrick, not to embarrass you, and you could punt on this one. But,
all right, Steve.
And it's just a male panel, but is the lack of women entrepreneurs nature versus nurture?
Well, I think the fact that Mark here has constrained our discussion to this Silicon Valley tech entrepreneur.
It was Steve.
It was Steve. Okay, fine. It was Steve. I think if we're talking that, then yeah, I think it's a huge shame, and it probably is a lot of nurture. I'm not a Larry Summers. I'm not going to say it's nature. But when you look at, and I think the census that's going on this year has revealed just this. I think roughly 40% of the small businesses in this country are owned by women. And that is in stark contrast to the narrower definition of entrepreneur that we're discussing today. So I think, yeah, Steve, probably it has to do with engineering schools. It has to do with this business environment. It has to do with, if you look down the Forbes Midas list, the league tables for our industry, you just look down that list of the top venture capitalists every single year and try to find something that's common about all of them. Do they have a common educational background? Do they have a common vocational background? Do they have a common national origin? The answer is no to all of them. The only thing that's common about them is they're predominantly men.
Got it.
Steve, this is why this topic is so important, because we have systematic biases in Silicon Valley. The venture capitalists assume that entrepreneurs are born a certain way, and that John Doerr said in one talk that they tend to be young, white, male college dropouts. So that's the image that they have in their head. So therefore, when a venture capitalist sits with an entrepreneur and they're not young, white, male college dropouts, they're going to have a bias against them, and that's where this problem comes from.
At a minimum, let's be fair to the VC industry, which is this. Of 100 pitches that I get of people wanting to raise money, I will tell you 3 to 5 of them are women.
That's because we scare them away. We don't give them the encouragement that they drop out midway in their careers.
We as a society maybe, but we not as a venture capital industry. So I just want to be
the venture
careful.
Capital is the heart of
I
a
just
lot of
want
the
to be
problems
careful,
in Silicon Valley.
Vivek, not to lay the blame at the door of VCs who have a stereotype of saying they will or will not fund a woman. Our single biggest outlier in performance in our last fund was led by a woman. It's company, market cap of about $1.7, $1.8 billion. We own a
There's
very large
the problem is
substantive
there's
share.
systematic
She
bias.
has built the company from the start to a publicly traded company.
Mark,
No. When you start up by assuming that an entrepreneur has to be born a certain way and have certain traits, you look for those traits. And if they happen to be female, they don't fit that model, and therefore you discriminate against them. That's the problem.
Your data is very convenient, because if I have 100 people walking my door and 5 are women, the odds are that I'm going to fund less women. Just don't be convenient with the
Mark,
facts.
let me ask Vivek's question a little historically. And I came to the Valley about 32 years ago. Almost embarrassed to say how long ago. And back then, there were no Asian CEOs, or if you saw one, it was incredibly rare. And there were no Indian CEOs. Again, I remember running into Vinod at Sun and Daisy, and it's even before he went to Kleiner. And when he went to Kleiner, he was known as the Indian VC. So was it that 30 years ago, Indians and Asians just weren't smart?
Indians have gone from 0 to founding 15.5% of Silicon Valley companies.
But Mark, I'm just throwing this out as a nature. I mean, was there something that changed in the DNA?
Well, look, starting with the fact that I have not studied that topic, but it's possible that demographics have changed. It's possible that there has been more of a migration to people in Silicon Valley of Asian descent, of which I would include Indian population, over the last 35 years. And I believe there are societal barriers in place, and that have been in place, that are changing over time, and thank God, are starting to create opportunities for even new classes of people who have had barriers, whether it's women or African Americans, and those barriers are changing. There's no question that there are societal barriers. I don't argue that. I would tell you, just for the record, in my family, my father's a pediatrician, doesn't have an ounce of entrepreneurial ambition or skills in him, and my mom started 4 or 5 businesses, and I feel like my mentor in life, the bit that was nurture, came more from my mom and 0 from my dad.
But Steve, I want to answer your question with my own experience over here. I happen to be part of a spin-off from First Boston in New York City, which we grew from 0 to 120 million in 5 years. Spectacular success, the most successful software company ever of its time. We took it public. And then I was starting my second company, except we had moved to North Carolina. I started networking, and over here I could get Bill Gates to return my phone calls. Scott McNeely would return my emails. Anyone I wrote to would respond to my emails. The local venture capitalists wouldn't return my emails in Raleigh, RTP. And eventually I networked through the Indian system.
And why was it?
Well, I'll tell you. I got through to Vinod Khosla. Vinod introduced me to others, and the Indian network helped me. And I was able to get financing. And then by the time I was done, I had Greylock giving me term sheets. I had a who's who giving me term sheets. And then I had the local venture capitalists coming out of their caves to hand me term sheets, begging me to take their money. And I said, why didn't you bastards take my money when I was coming to you? You know what the response was? I happened to go to lunch with one of them. He put his feet on the table in front of me. He says, you know something, Vivek, the problem is you people don't make good CEOs. It was the same nonsense that we see in Silicon Valley, that my people weren't worthy of venture capital because we didn't make good CEOs. Well, guess what? My people in Silicon Valley broke the glass ceiling. We founded our own networks. We achieved success, and we started helping each other, and we changed the stereotype.
So Vivek,
that's what women need to do right now.
Since you're on a roll, let me ask you, since we've been beating up Mark on this side, I want to beat up Vivek a bit. Your position is this can be nurtured, this could be trained, it's not genetic,
Absolutely.
It's whatever. Great. Why don't you describe for us the 3 classes or 3 skills you believe can be trained? You could pick anybody out of a random pile of people. What can you train them that would change their lives in entrepreneurship?
First, I want you to tell them what starting a business is all about. They have to know what it means to set up a business plan, how to incorporate a company. They have to know how to sell. They have to know how to market. They have to learn how to hire people. Then have to learn how to manage. There are a lot of skills here. These are the things they teach you in business school. These are the things they teach you in management school. You have to learn those skills. You don't have to learn everything at the same time, but you have to go through a progression of learning these things. You teach those to, now you do need basic IQ. You can't take someone off the street who doesn't have basic street smarts and make them into an entrepreneur. They have to be reasonably intelligent.
Whoa, isn't that nature? Did you
Well,
just insert some nature into
Well,
your nurture?
yeah, because the fact is some people are good at learning some things and some people are not good at learning
So
something.
you would have an IQ means test for the nurture side.
But I don't require a high IQ. I'm not that smart a guy. I'm an average IQ person who happened to learn the ropes. I could learn and I could realize my weaknesses and I could innovate my way through the things. But I didn't start off by being a hotshot entrepreneur. But
Boy,
by the
Louis
time I was done, I
Terman has
built two
given
great
you a
companies.
thumbs up from Stanford. That's an obscure Stanford joke, sorry. So you believe those things can...
The majority of people can be taught to become entrepreneurs and that they can succeed.
And Patrick, do you believe that?
No, I think I have a more nuanced and therefore correct view, which is that it's not nature or nurture. You're born with certain propensities, and the circumstances that you're placed in can allow you to express those. Now, here's one example. I have backed 4 college dropouts, 3 of them from this institution here. All 4 of them were sophomores when they dropped out.
Maybe that's saying something about Stanford.
Well, I asked myself, why is that? What's magical about this age, 19? And I think over a long period of time, here's what it is. I think juniors and seniors, kind of have a sunk cost problem. They're like, well, I've been here for 3 or 4 years. I've only got a few months to go. I'm just going to finish my degree. As a freshman, you are like, wow, I'm living away from home for the first time. Oh my God, how do I do laundry? You're not thinking about doing anything. Sophomores are the ones who have figured it out in freshman year, who don't yet have a lot of sunk cost, and who are more willing than either of those other 3 years to actually take a risk and do something. And I don't think it's that, I came, because I've backed these 4 college dropouts across, the last 5 years. So I don't think it's a vintage year argument. I think it's actually a circumstantial argument. It is that there are certain circumstances that are present in that sophomore year that allow people who are more likely to become entrepreneurs to actually express that quality and to go for it.
So, Patrick, let me just continue, if I can, for the rest of the panelists, with you for a sec. How many deals have you done so far?
I think I'm on 6 boards now.
6 boards. And how many deals have you looked at?
Oh gosh, in the probably low single-digit thousands, I would guess.
Great. So out of those thousands, do you think you now have some pattern recognition skills?
Well, I don't really know. That's the truth of the matter, Steve. I don't really.
Do you think your partners have pattern recognition?
Yeah, I think so. I
Great.
think if you look at venture capital funds, you look at the list of the top venture capital funds today versus 10 years ago versus 20 years ago, that list has a lot of the same players.
Great.
When you look at the same list for hedge funds, for instance, there are not a lot of the same players. And I think that speaks to skill rather than luck.
Play this out with a real solid big VC firm. So those pattern recognition skills today go across a whole set of cultures.
Yeah, well, they have to.
They have to.
They have to.
But let's just contend for sake of argument and argue back if you don't think it's true. 30 years ago, they were funding white guys.
I think that observation is a truism of a more general statement, which is that human beings value similarity. We like people who are like us.
Great.
And because 30 years ago, the venture capital industry was, you're right, a bunch of white men, people fear what they do not understand, and they don't favor what they don't understand. So when the white man talked with a black woman, he really couldn't see her for who she was. Today, obviously, venture is still, I think, not entirely as diverse as a lot of other industries, but it is more diverse. And we have learned because, Silicon Valley, although we're still number 1, number 2 is catching up very quickly. We're no longer we don't have a monopoly on entrepreneurship. So we've been forced to be more open-minded, to let in different types of people, and to see people for who they are, and not merely their similarity to us.
And I'm going to get to Mark, and this one, thank you, Patrick. I wasn't going to using this to point out that VCs have biases that are unfair, but just to maybe observe that these selection biases might actually be confusing cause and effect. That is, if we tend to select people who are loud, aggressive, high school dropouts, etc., we now say, well, that must be the pattern of success. Not that we've actually done an A-B test or an ABC test that has said, gee, over 30 years, we've kind of invested in people who are loud and aggressive and people who are just quiet and competent and people who are, we tend to do what we're, as you said, are comfortable with.
But that's the problem the women have in Silicon Valley, and therefore they're discouraged from becoming entrepreneurs, and it's a downward spiral for them.
So that's why I want to get to Mark and say,
well, can I add one more thought, Steve? I think that one of the biggest mistakes that venture capitalists make is that bias towards the self, and I think people don't really realize how pervasive it is, and so I agree with Vivek. I think women face that problem in Silicon Valley.
So Mark, you've been quiet for a while. So chime in. Help us understand. What do you think would really make the case for nature? Is there a way to test this?
My argument, Steve, is that I fundamentally believe it's unknowable and subjective and subject to what Nassim Taleb called the narrative fallacy, which is if I tried to do A/B testing, the set of factors that determine the trajectory of success or not are influenced by so many different factors as to be unstatistical. You're not able to study it now. So I think that anything you come up with is going to be subjective. And if I'm honest, that's my biggest beef that I had, Vivek, with your first piece, was not that I disagreed, not that I don't give you a subjective right to say you believe it's more nurture than nature, and I accept that point of view. I believe actually quite close to what you're saying, which is it's both. There might be a preponderance to more one attribute or one characteristic or the other. It might be partially cultural and environmental. But I don't believe that there is a way to statistically prove anything. So I'm just really skeptical of anybody who says, I have data. I've studied 549 companies, and I have the answer. I think it's bollocks to suggest that.
I'm not saying it. I'm saying look at the
Vivek,
data on women, for example. 50% of our population is excluded from venture capital. Now, that itself is a pretty damning statistic.
That's a bad thing, I agree. But
it's a damning statistic.
But I agree.
Right.
I agree. But trying to use that to prove a different point makes no sense.
But the point is that if you went by nature, then in those 50%, are we saying that entire 50% of the population isn't entrepreneurial, or they can't be innovative, or they can't be successful?
No, because I didn't say it's all nature. I said it's part nature, part nurture, and I like
You said it's 80% nature.
In my view,
right. So therefore, 80% of that 50% sample is not fit for entrepreneurship.
So no, I think that two things I would say. Number one, I do believe vehemently that if the system allowed women or encouraged women, or if women, for whatever reason in their rearing, had both the ambition and the system encouraged it, I think it would be equal amount of successful entrepreneurs, but the system doesn't present that.
But
at
Mark,
least
you
were
the system. You've said that in your last fund, the highest success, the biggest hit you had was a company run by women.
That is true.
So have you gone out and systematically tried to target other women?
Because I think that's ridiculous.
But you believe that it's nature, and you've got a great data point there. Your biggest hit was a woman-run company.
That doesn't mean
why not go search for them if all the rest of us aren't searching?
My biggest hit was a social network. Therefore, I'm only going to fund social networks. My biggest hit was. That just makes no sense. For me, I'm looking for very talented entrepreneurs in my definition of talent, who I believe have a good idea. Who I believe have the attributes for success as I define them, who I can invest in at the right price at the right time.
Because you don't believe you could create them, you'll fund them when they come in the door.
Yes, I don't believe I can create them.
Well, my question is not why are you creating them. My question is why aren't you finding them where you fit?
I accept we are open-minded to seeing more women walk in the door.
But it's the door.
where I will cede is,
Yeah.
we probably could do a better job of thinking about how to get more in the door.
Right.
But that doesn't mean a priori that I want to seek out a woman and fund her just because the woman was the one who was the most successful.
So let me-
By the way, I don't think that Mark is biased by any means, but generally speaking, the venture capital community in Silicon Valley is highly biased. And this is what the problem is, that they've got this obsession that it's nature, we're smarter than everyone else, we're great at pattern recognition. We look at all the money we made a decade ago. These venture capitalists are bleeding money right now. They're doing much worse than the Dow and almost any other index, but they still think that they're the kings and the kingmakers.
This is
and
where,
therefore they think that they know better than everyone else
But
does.
you're stereotyping VCs in the same way you don't like VCs to stereotype, which is horrible. Here's what I do believe.
I'm looking at the big picture here, the data that 3%
So
of the
Vivek,
money goes
But
to women.
if I could
Let's
just
let
finish
Mark
one quick thought,
finish.
Steve, is that I believe that that a lot of luck has determined success or lack of success. I believe that, yes, there are institutional funds. I don't know if it proves that they're better company pickers or nurturers, or perhaps, and I'm not saying this is the reason, but perhaps they have better networks so that they can help behind the scenes with their keiretsu and helping make companies succeed. I don't know. It's certainly a factor. I mean, to say that it's no factor that Kleiner Perkins or Sequoia or Excel or Benchmark have better access to the top talent coming out of Stanford or better access to Google to sell their companies to, it definitely factors in there. So
what I'd like to do is, before Mark has to end up sleeping on the couch tonight and Vivek gets his tires slashed by Sequoia, let me just throw in...
John Doerr, let's not let him off the hook.
Let me just throw in one, which is, for those of you who read my blog, my bias. What factor does culture have? That is, how do you explain that China, for 30, 40 years ago, marketing wasn't a profession and entrepreneurship was a crime, to today, where we have one of the most entrepreneurial nations in the world? Is that nature, nurture, culture? What goes on there?
As the only Chinese on the panel, that
Please speak to
added
those
authority.
billion people. Yeah.
I think, once again, it is what I've been saying all along, which is that you have an incredibly I think you have an incredibly entrepreneurial gene pool, if you want to put it that way. The Chinese are incredibly entrepreneurial. However, we, and I speak very broadly and for all Chinese people, we made a very, even though I was not born in China, I was born in Canada, we made a wrong turn in the kind of late 30s, early 40s. There were a bunch of competing political systems. And I think China just chose wrong. They chose communism over a free market economy. In many ways, communism at that point had not been disproved. It hadn't really had this horrible run that it's had over the last 50, 60 years. And it seemed a lot more consistent with the culture, a lot more authentic to a kind of Confucian, communitarian, family-oriented society. And so it seemed like a better fit, a better modern political fit in the days after the dynasty for that country. Now, that turned out to be a freaking disaster.
So were they closet entrepreneurs?
But just think about this. No, Steve, they weren't closet entrepreneurs because the Chinese who were lucky enough to just happen to be in Hong Kong when the British took them over thrived as entrepreneurs. That means,
Malaysia, or
Malaysia, or Singapore, or Taiwan. You just
Right.
name them, and that's because it was the same. It was literally the same gene pool placed in entirely different circumstances. And now fast forward 50, 60 years later, we're now in a time when the Chinese government has realized, oh my God, we are extinct. And we have to just manage this transition in as peaceful a way as possible so it doesn't blow up like it did many years ago in Russia. And now you're starting to see a very well-managed transition. You're starting to see what I believe is the genuine expression of the Chinese entrepreneurial spirit.
So Patrick, up till now you were kind of in the middle, except when it comes to the Chinese gene pool of being much better genetics. So
It's all
so
nurture
Mark,
except for Chinese.
Right, except for Chinese. So with that, let me thank the panelists and open this up for questions, if I can. Yes.
So just start by saying that my entire development team are all Chinese. They have to be based in Edinburgh. So I think that there are three factors. That firstly, genetic factors respond to certain qualities. Secondly, circumstances that are within your control. Do you actually go out there as an individual, make the Chinese don't have a word for entrepreneur. I may be wrong, but
Is there a Chinese word for entrepreneur, by the way?
Oh, there probably is. I just don't know it.
the third thing, very briefly, is I'm on a similar panel actually on Friday at the of the Future Biodiversity Forum panel talking about the challenges of the young entrepreneurs. And just a story that I will tell is just a couple of weeks ago, I was just checking into my hotel. The hallway was strewn with objects, just dotted across the floor. And there was a small boy, he couldn't have been older than 6 years old. The door of the hotel room was open ajar. And I had this dialogue between the parents saying, "Where's Ben?" "I don't know." And the father comes out and says, "What on earth are you doing?" And just a couple of minutes before, he was like a garage sale, and he'd offered to sell me a magazine. Certainly not.
That's a young entrepreneur.
In a lot of trouble, and the father scooped up his
He'll be doing deals at Goldman next year. Thank you. Next question. Yes.
Actually, really enjoyed that. Thanks, by the way. The debate back and forth was very worthwhile. So I actually just moved here about 3 months ago. I've spent the last, I was born out of the country, I was born in Ukraine, moved to the States. In the last few years, I've been in Dallas and Atlanta. I went to school, Georgia Tech in Atlanta, that puts out fantastic engineers, at least in my biased point of view, but is not very well known across the country for putting out entrepreneurs. And I've had a debate with a lot of people going back and forth as, how do we compare it with schools like MIT, Stanford, Duke, Princeton, so on and so forth. One of the things that I've noticed is that, growing up in a house where I did have a father that did start a business, it was a clinic, but it wasn't necessarily a high-tech business. I tried to get businesses going in Atlanta and then later in Dallas as well. And the community and the aspect of having people around to reach out to was a big factor. It was tough to get questions answered. It was tough to understand which direction to go to, and you can get discouraged very quickly when you can't find the right path. I think I've learned a lot from it, but I think there's kind of like what you said, Steve, is that there's a significant amount of culture relevant to an area, and that to the Georgia Tech folks that are in Atlanta, they live in a culture that is significantly more conservative than other parts of the country, and don't necessarily know that they can go in and be an entrepreneur.
And I should make two observations on that. One is what's really interesting, by the way, looking at other areas of the country and the world that want to start entrepreneurial centers in their local area, they kind of miss, I think, one of the interesting things about Silicon Valley. Most entrepreneurs here weren't born here. You came here. Right? And so, in fact, entrepreneurial centers attract talent from all over. And that leads to a second consequence. You're typically far away from your social infrastructure of people who will say you can't do that. Gee, you'll embarrass the family, or you'll embarrass... No. In a lot of cultures, gee, mom and dad have worked in the same job for 18 years and you're changing jobs every 18 months. What are you thinking? Well, when they don't even know what they're doing. So there's something about the cultural environment. And then, as you noticed here, you could, throw a rock and hit 6 lawyers, which is a good idea, and 3 entrepreneurs and, 2 VCs in the same restaurant and not even go halfway across the room. The density of the ancillary services is actually quite useful, and there's a notion of critical mass.
Yeah, I've been researching his exact question as to why is it that there's so much entrepreneurship here. I mean, why does it Indians became so successful? I mean, in 2000, they constituted 6% of the workforce of Silicon Valley. In that 1995 to 2005 period, they started 15.5% of its companies. How do you go from 0 to 15.5% in the most entrepreneurial land in the world this easily? The answer basically is it's the networks that they formed. Just like I was able to tap into Vinod Khosla, Kanwal Rekhi, and these people, and they taught me how to get around the system. They said, ignore these schmucks in Raleigh. That's how it was here 20 years ago. They coached me through it, gave me introductions. That's how the network here works. And the difference that you have between here and Atlanta is that here you just go and bump into anyone in a cafe. They're very open, they're very helpful. The attitude is sharing. There's no secrecy here. Everyone wants to help you. They want to, they'll tell you about what they're doing. They'll advise you on what you're doing, and you become part of the network. Silicon Valley is one giant social network. That's why the magic happens over here.
So
that's why I moved here.
Do you have papers on this? Does Kaufman
I'm doing a major research project on this.
For Kaufman or for...
I mean, Kaufman is funding my research. But it'll be published through Duke, Harvard, and Berkeley, three
Great.
universities I'm working with.
Next, any other comments on this from the rest of the panel?
I would just say that there's a certain type of entrepreneurship that exists in Silicon Valley. It is, and I think for the foreseeable time, will remain the center of tech entrepreneurship. But if you want to talk film entrepreneurship, it exists in Hollywood for the same reason tech entrepreneurship exists here. It attracts people from all over the world who want to be in that industry. There are support networks. There are people who are open and have experience and want to see the young crowds come through in the same way that financial services in New York or wherever. So I think culture matters. I think location matters. And I think it is specific to the industry that you're in.
Just as an aside, if for any of you who are interested, Annalise Saxenian's book, Regional Advantage, is probably the best work on why Silicon Valley as a region took off versus Route 128 in Boston.
I have an article next week in Businessweek about that exact topic and about Silicon Valley, so stay tuned.
What shocked me actually was that it's so hyper-local. I backed a company in Berkeley, and they felt that even in Berkeley, which is just 30-minute drive from here, that it wasn't the same culture. That they were still answering questions like, should we release quickly and iterate fast versus wait for one monolithic release. And so they actually moved the company south.
Next question.
Great discussion, same as everybody's been saying, and I think I really like the nuances that have come out in terms of nature, nurture, societal barriers, in some cases culture. But I'm curious to take it back to sort of the individual level for you guys. When you meet somebody who's a potential investment or somebody you're networking with or what have you, who hasn't expressed that entrepreneurialism in the past, what's the thought process you go through in judging their potential, whether it is whether you consider it a mix of nature or nurture? Is it something that they don't have for whatever reason, or is it something that hasn't been expressed yet? And what, obviously something like quitting your job is a concrete sign, but absent something like that, what kind of thought process do you go through?
I'll let the panel start, and then I'll have...
Mark, why don't you answer this?
Sure, yeah. No, so let me say this. I get approached by people all the time who say, I'm 28 or 29 years old. I need to have this next job for 4 years to prove myself so that when I'm 34, I can get funded. I mean, I'm sort of making up the ages, but sort of not. I have a friend who's 43, Harvard undergrad, Harvard Business School, has done 4 startups, never been a CEO. And he says to me, I want to do COO jobs so that I can prove myself to be CEO. And then you turn around and I look at Adley, a company that I funded about 9 months ago in Los Angeles, where the founder's 23. So I think I think that generally as an entrepreneur, you either display certain attributes, rightly or wrongly, that VCs perceive as success factors, and therefore you're more likely to get funded, or you don't. I don't think there's age or experience per se that necessarily qualifies you. This particular individual, just for the sake of discussion, dropped out of college and started a company, and that company was unsuccessful. But through that experience of observing that unsuccessful launch and the lessons I believed he learned, by the time he was ready to found his next one, I was ready to fund it. So.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of people who come and say, here's my plan. I'm going to keep this job for 4 years, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do that. And most of the people who come see us are actually committed. And they know they want to start a company, or they have already started a company. And so at that point, to me, it really doesn't, I don't sit there and think, oh, he's ready to start a company. He's ready to go. Was it nature or was it nurture? Was it nature or was it nurture? I just know they're ready to go. And I think that, like all of you here and like all of us on the panel, we've all been extraordinarily lucky to basically surround ourselves with groups of extraordinary people. And so, if you could systematize what we look for, I think it'd be a much easier job than it is. But it is really a long-term pattern recognition thing where you do, across the totality of your own experience, think to yourself, who have I known who has been successful? And it's kind of deep brain, tribal knowledge of there's something that just tweaks in you that makes you think, God, the person standing across the table from me I feel like they're going to be successful. I wish I could quantify it. I wish I could say, here are the 10 things you look for. But I think at the end of the day, you could make stuff up and you could articulate it, but it really is that kind of tribal.
I could give you the list, but that's
okay. Let me provide the non-venture capital version of the same story. I see people like that all the time. Now, venture capitalists here answer in a certain way because that's their universe. They're basically looking at people who take venture capital. Now, in several studies I've done, we looked at large samples of successful entrepreneurs. And what we found was that only 11% of first-time successful entrepreneurs take venture capital. In other words, 89% don't, right? So they have a total different mindset. Now, what I find is that, in fact, what our research showed was that the number one reason why people don't start companies is that they're afraid of risk, they're afraid of failure, that they don't know how to do it. Those are the three factors which stops them. So once they come, what happens is that typically people come to a junction in their life. The average age of an entrepreneur is 40. It's not 23, it's not 19, it's not 25, it's 40. The average entrepreneur in engineering and technology and high-tech related fields. What happens is that they typically come to a point that they're comfortable, that they have enough savings, their kids are now in their teens or whatever they might be, and they're now saying, look, I'm already at 40. If I don't become an entrepreneur right now, if I don't make it big now, right now, I'll never do it. So this starts tearing them apart. And again, I've been there myself, so I can relate to it. This whole issue about getting left behind. And then something happens. That they either lose their job, they hate their boss, or they just decide that they're going to take the risk. Very often, the people who get left behind never take that risk. Majority of people never take that risk, but typically some circumstance happens. This is where I happen to agree with Mark and Patrick, that something happens there. Circumstances change that they have to take that risk. And then they jump in and do what they have to do. Then they learn and network.
So necessity is the mother of all invention.
Yeah, it is necessity, which basically triggers off that transition from being in a safe corporate world to becoming an entrepreneur.
So I'm going to take a shot at this as well. But Vivek, let me just do a data point. The average age 40, is that from that Kaufman study?
Yeah, that's my study.
All right. Let me just observe for the audience that was through a set of industries that was much broader than Silicon Valley.
Yes.
That's correct.
I've done 3 of those.
Right.
Silicon Valley was 39. And Kaufman has looked at other data sets. They looked at BLS, they looked at extensive other data sets, and they came back with the same number.
Okay. So let me answer your question in a very different way. I was a serial entrepreneur. I did 8 startups. And in my career, my mentors were... on a good day, you would call them street fighters, and on a bad day, you'd use names I wouldn't want to get caught on tape saying. And they were from the fire-ready AIM school. Darn, we're entrepreneurs. We'll go figure it out later. We're pirates. We'll, blah, blah, blah. And that was my worldview to the day I retired. That's the only type of entrepreneur. If you're not ready, you need plans. You're not an entrepreneur. You can't be. And then I started teaching at Stanford and Berkeley, and actually started teaching students who were working on their MBAs and PhDs in engineering, who were actually a lot more thoughtful than I was. But in fact, I learned that you could actually teach them to think about that entrepreneurship was a career they actually not only might want to think about, but actually could excel in if you just showed them the skills they were missing and taught them some of those basic patterns of how to build a company. They certainly had more IQ points than most of the startups I did combined, but they lacked kind of that instinct of how to get out the door. Most well-known ones, but others who are kind of frustrated with this lack of practical, experiential, hands-on, let me teach you what you're supposed to do as an entrepreneur. Universities tend to catch up to this stuff, and in another 5 years we'll see these curriculums at Stanford and Berkeley and Harvard as well. Tom Eisman, Tom Byers here at Stanford, et cetera, get it. And it'll take a while. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Steve,
but that's...
isn't it a little broader than that? I mean, in addition to equipping students with the skills, I feel like we also have to equip them with a risk profile, because too many college students graduate, they're saddled by debt, they could be incredibly entrepreneurial and incredible, but they just simply can't afford to take that risk. They have to pay off their student debt, so they're going to sell their enormous talents to Goldman Sachs or McKinsey or whatever. And I just feel like you got these masses, these waves of incredibly talented people just flooding into, well, what used to be finance or consulting or some job to pay off what at the end of the day is actually, although it never feels like it at the time, a trivial amount of money. And if we could adjust that risk profile to to produce 1 or 2 more Bill Gates or Larry or Sergey's, I think that does so much more for society than anything.
Steve, I teach at the Masters of Engineering Management program at Duke. And I got to tell you, it's the exact. I mean, my heart bleeds every time one of my brilliant engineering students ends up joining Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley. But I tell them, you just sold your soul. But the fact is, as Patrick said, they have to do it because they have these massive mortgages on their head and they can't afford the risk. They've borrowed too much money. So I sympathize with what you're saying.
But let me be clear, but also to the questioner. Once I teach these students that you can be entrepreneurs, I bust part of their anatomy in class, making sure that they want to be. Because entrepreneurship is a cultural fad at major universities. Everybody thinks it's cool. When I did it, you had to be crazy. Now it's actually, it's not a pejorative, it's actually a cachet. So I'll teach you the skills, but I'm also going to teach you how miserable it could be being thrown out of customers' offices on cold calls. And you'll get that experience, at least the way I teach. Entrepreneurship is not a series of lectures because customers don't ask for your business plan. So along with the training, it's also the realities of this. So with that, I think we're out of time, and we'll hang around for a couple minutes. And I appreciate the audience here and stuffing the balconies and sitting in the aisles. For those of you in the television, you can't see the standing room only. It's getting a little stuffy in here. So thank you very much.